Ever feel like you're just stuck in a loop, tackling the same problems over and over again?
Yeah.
Today, we are going deep into root cause analysis, or RCA.
RCA.
It's a way to kind of break those cycles,
Yeah.
become a true problem-solving, I don't know, ninja.
Ninja. I like it.
No matter what field you're in, really.
Yeah, and we're going beyond those like surface level fixes.
Right.
We're talking about uncovering the real root causes.
Yeah.
Those underlying issues that keep those pesky problems popping up.
Exactly. We've got a stack of articles and book excerpts from experts like Bob Latino.
Oh yeah, good stuff.
All about building a robust RCA system.
Love it.
And you might be thinking, RCA?
Yeah.
Isn't that just for engineers and factories?
Right.
But trust me, this stuff is applicable to pretty much any area of life.
It's true. Think about it. Haven't you ever wished you could stop just reacting to problems and start preventing them?
Oh,
Even in the first place. That's what effective RCA is all about.
Okay, let's unpack this idea of RCA as a system.
All right.
Bob Latino argues that a lot of organizations treat it like a one-off task.
Right.
Something you do after a major incident and then you forget about it.
Oh yeah, check the box, move on.
Yeah. But he says truly effective RCA is integrated into how an organization operates.
Okay.
The constant feedback loop for improvement.
I see, yeah.
He compares it to passing a regulatory audit, like for ISO 9000.
Oh, interesting.
You can check all the boxes and be compliant on paper.
Right.
But if the process itself is flawed, you're not actually going to improve reliability or safety.
It's like following a recipe with bad instructions. You might technically be doing what it says, but the end result, not going to be what you want.
So what are some of the hallmarks of a robust RCA system? What separates the great from just going through the motions?
Well, for starters, it's about choosing the right problems to analyze.
Okay.
Not every issue needs a deep dive. You want to focus on the recurring problems, the ones that keep draining your time, your money, or resources.
So it's about picking your battles, right?
Yeah.
If a coffee machine breaks down once, maybe you just fix it. But if it's happening constantly, that's when you bring in the RCA big guns.
Exactly. And to do a good RCA, you need good data. Not just hearsay or assumptions, but reliable information about what's happening and why. That means having systems in place to collect accurate data, not relying on guesswork.
And I imagine understanding the human element is a big part of this too, right?
Of course.
Because let's face it, most failures involve human error in some way.
Absolutely. One of our sources really emphasized this thing called human and organizational performance,
Okay.
or HOP.
HOP.
It's about recognizing that people and the systems they work within contribute to problems.
So instead of pointing fingers and saying Bob messed up,
Right.
you're looking at the factors that might have influenced Bob's decisions.
Yeah.
Like unclear procedures, poor communication, or even just lack of training.
Right. We're not trying to let anyone off the hook, but we also need to understand the context of those decisions. Bob might have made what seemed like the most logical choice at the time,
Yeah.
based on the information he had
Yeah.
and the systems he was working within.
This is making me think about how often we might judge someone's actions without knowing the full story. Like that time I cut someone off in traffic, they probably thought I was just a jerk, but what they didn't know was that I was rushing my dog to the emergency vet.
Exactly. And that's why good RCA goes beyond simply assigning blame. It's about understanding intent.
Okay.
So instead of asking, why did Bob do that?
Yeah.
You're asking, why did that decision make sense to Bob at the time?
That's such a powerful shift in perspective. It makes me think about how often we might misinterpret someone's actions without understanding the full context.
And this ties into a concept called the hierarchy of interventional effectiveness.
Okay.
It's this idea that different ways of addressing problems have different levels of effectiveness. At the bottom of the hierarchy, the least effective are things like retraining or punishment.
Right.
They might address the immediate symptom, but they don't get to the root cause.
So what kinds of interventions are at the top P of this hierarchy? What's the most effective way to prevent these problems from happening again?
Well, the most effective interventions are those that change the system itself, the processes, the environment, the tools people use.
Right.
For example, instead of just retraining Bob after he makes a mistake, you might look at how to simplify a complex procedure, provide better training materials, or even redesign the workspace to reduce the likelihood of that error happening again.
So it's like setting people up for success by designing systems that are more intuitive, user-friendly, and error-proof.
Precisely. We're not just trying to fix the person, we're trying to fix the system that led to the problem in the first place.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this goes way beyond just finding a quick fix. This is about creating lasting change. By understanding how all these different factors, the people, the processes, the environment, interact to create both problems and solutions.
And that brings us to the next important element of a robust RCA system, choosing the right tools for the job. Because just like you wouldn't use a hammer to fix a leaky faucet, you wouldn't use a simple tool to tackle a complex problem.
All right, so let's talk tools. What are some of the common methods people use for RTA, and what are their strengths and weaknesses?
Well, one of the most common and often misused tools is the 5 whys method.
5 whys.
It seems simple enough. You just ask why 5 times in a row, and supposedly you'll arrive at the root cause. But the problem is that it assumes failure happens in a nice linear way, which is rarely the case in real life.
Right, it's like that old saying, for want of a nail the shoe was lost, for want of a shoe the horse was lost. It assumes a simple chain reaction. But in reality, there are usually multiple factors at play.
Exactly, and because the 5 whys often leads to blaming an individual, like,
Yeah.
why didn't Bob tighten the bolt properly?
Right.
It doesn't encourage a deeper understanding of the systemic issues that might have contributed to the problem.
So if the 5 whys isn't the best tool for the job, what are some alternatives? What are the great RCA tools that can help us get to those deeper systemic causes?
One tool that can be helpful for brainstorming is the fishbone diagram, also known as the Ishikawa diagram.
Okay.
Um, it helps you visually represent categories of potential causes,
Yeah.
prompting you to consider things like materials, methods, machines, environment, and people. But it's still very reliant on opinions and brainstorming. It doesn't force you to dig as deeply for evidence or provide as structured an approach as some other methods.
So if those are the good, what would be considered the great RCA tools?
Well, according to Bob Latino, the gold standard is using logic trees, also known as causal factor trees.
Okay.
These tools visually represent chains of cause and effect. But unlike the 5 whys, they acknowledge that these chains aren't always linear. They force you to go deeper, past the immediate physical causes, to the human decisions that were made, and then even further to the underlying system flaws that influence those decisions, what we call the latent roots.
And what's really cool about logic trees is that they require evidence to back up each link in the chain.
Oh, absolutely.
It's not just about speculating or brainstorming. You have to actually prove that each cause led to the next effect. It's like being a detective, gathering clues to solve the mystery of why something went wrong.
Exactly. And this evidence-based approach helps to move the conversation away from blame and towards a more objective understanding of what happened. It's about focusing on the facts, not the opinions.
So if I'm using a logic tree and I find that Bob didn't follow the procedure is one of the causes, I can't just stop there. I have to ask, why didn't Bob follow the procedure? Was the procedure unclear? Was he not properly trained? Were there distractions or time pressures that prevented him from following it correctly?
Right, you keep digging deeper until you get to those underlying system flaws that set Bob up for failure. And by addressing those root causes, you can prevent similar problems from happening in the future, even if Bob is no longer in that role.
To illustrate this point, Bob Latino uses this really interesting case study from his article about black specks found in a solvent shipment. He shows how different RCA methods lead to vastly different conclusions and solutions depending on how deep you dig.
Exactly. The 5 whys stopped short at blaming a worker who didn't think a filter was necessary.
Right.
A fishbone diagram identified a few more potential factors,
Okay.
but without strong evidence to back them up. But the logic tree, on the other hand, revealed a much more complex picture.
It uncovered multiple interconnected causes like issues with the filtering process, systemic flaws in purchasing procedures, inadequate inspection practices,
Oh, wow.
and even cost-cutting measures that led to reduced work hours for inspectors. It wasn't just one person's mistake. It was a whole chain of events and systemic failures that led to the problem.
And by understanding those deeper causes, the company was able to implement more effective solutions, preventing the problem from recurring and even improving the overall quality of their product. It wasn't just a quick fix, it was a lasting improvement.
This is where we really start to see the power of effective RCA, right? It goes way beyond just fixing a broken part or reprimanding an employee. It's about creating a culture of continuous improvement by understanding how things really work and designing systems that are more reliable, efficient, and ultimately more successful.
Exactly. And it's not just about fixing things that are broken. It's about understanding how things work or don't work and creating systems that are more reliable and resilient in the first place. It's a shift from root cause failure analysis, or RCFA, which focuses on what went wrong, to simply RCA, which is more about continuous improvement.
And that's something we can all apply, not just in our workplaces, but in any area of life where we're trying to make things better, right?
Absolutely. Think about those frustrating problems you face that seem to recur. Maybe it's a communication breakdown at work, a recurring conflict in a relationship, or even a bad habit you just can't seem to break.
Mhm.
The principles of RCA can help.
Instead of just addressing the symptom, the missed deadline, the argument, the late night snack,
Right.
you can start asking, what are the underlying causes?
Yeah.
What are the systems or patterns that are contributing to this problem?
Precisely. And by understanding those root causes, you can start to create lasting solutions that address the problem at its source.
So we've talked about choosing the right problems to analyze, gathering good data, and using the right tools to dig deep for those root causes. But it sounds like there's still another piece to this puzzle, right?
Yeah.
If effective RCA is about understanding the human element and avoiding blame, how do we actually create a culture where that can happen?
That's a great question, and one that we'll be exploring in more depth in the next part of our deep dive. We'll be looking at how to build a culture of psychological safety where people feel comfortable speaking up, admitting mistakes, and sharing their insights without fear of retribution.